May 3rd, 1945, 2:47 a.m. 60 meters beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic, approximately 200 nautical miles west of the Faroe Islands. Inside the cramped, suffocating interior of U-534, Captain Lieutenant Herbert Nallo stood at the periscope, his hands trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. The war was over, everyone knew it, but the killing hadn't stopped. Above them, somewhere in the darkness, British destroyers prowled like sharks, their sonar pinging through the black water, searching, hunting, determined to add one more kill to their tally before peace was declared. Nallo's crew of 52 men waited in silence, barely breathing, listening to the death song of active sonar getting closer. They had survived 5 years of war, countless depth charge attacks, Arctic convoys, and Allied hunter-killer groups. They had sunk Allied ships, watched men die in burning oil, and lived like rats in a steel coffin beneath the sea. And now, with Germany collapsing and Hitler dead in his bunker, they were still running, still fighting, still hoping to survive just a few more hours. But the ocean had other plans. What happened next would seal U-534 in a tomb of water and metal for 3 decades, and when it finally resurfaced in 1972, it would bring with it secrets, mysteries, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. To understand U-534's final voyage, you must first understand the desperate madness of Nazi Germany in its final weeks. By May 1945, the Third Reich was dying. Soviet forces had taken Berlin. Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th. The Wehrmacht was surrendering by the hundreds of thousands. The concentration camps were being liberated, revealing horrors that would scar human consciousness forever. And yet, even as the regime collapsed, U-boats continued to patrol the Atlantic, following orders from a command structure that no longer existed, fighting a war that was already lost. U-534 was a Type IXC/40 U-boat, one of the larger submarine classes in the Kriegsmarine, designed for long-range patrols in distant waters. She was 252 feet long, displaced over 1,000 tons, and could dive to depths of 230 meters. Her crew lived in conditions that would break most men. Endless weeks submerged in a tube barely wide enough to stand in, breathing recycled air that smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and fear. They slept in shifts in bunks stacked 3 high, ate tinned food that tasted like metal, and used a single toilet shared by 52 men. The noise was constant. The throb of engines, the creak of the pressure hull, the drip of condensation. Privacy didn't exist. Comfort was a fantasy. Every dive could be your last, crushed by water pressure or blown apart by depth charges. And yet these men volunteered for U-boat service, knowing the statistics, knowing that by 1945, 75% of U-boat crews never came home. Herbert Nallo had taken command of U-534 in December 1944. He was 31 years old, a veteran submariner who'd survived 3 previous patrols, a professional naval officer who still believed in duty even as the cause he served revealed itself as monstrous. His orders for this final patrol were unusual, classified at the highest levels, delivered in person by officers who spoke in whispers and destroyed the written orders after Nallo read them. He was to sail from Kiel on the Baltic coast, transit through the dangerous waters between Norway and Scotland where Allied air patrols were intense, and make for Norway or possibly further. The exact destination remained vague. The cargo he carried was never officially recorded. That cargo has become the source of decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. When U-534 was finally raised from the seabed in 1972, investigators found several anomalies. There were extra provisions aboard, more than necessary for the crew size and patrol length. There were empty spaces in the cargo holds that suggested something had been removed before the submarine was scuttled. And most intriguingly, there were persistent rumors, never confirmed, never fully debunked, that U-534 was part of Operation Hannibal or one of the related evacuation schemes, carrying high-ranking Nazi officials or looted treasures or classified documents to safe havens in South America or neutral countries. The truth is probably less dramatic, but no less tragic. U-534 was likely executing a standard patrol with perhaps some additional mission to evacuate personnel or documents from Norway, where German forces still held out. But in the fog of war's end, with communication breaking down and command structures collapsing, exact missions became confused, orders were misunderstood or ignored, and men made decisions based on incomplete information and desperate hopes. U-534 departed Kiel on April 20th, 1945, Hitler's birthday, though this timing was likely coincidental. The submarine slipped through the Kiel Canal and into the North Sea, running submerged during daylight hours and surfacing only at night to recharge batteries and refresh the air. The journey was treacherous. Allied air patrols were omnipresent. British and American bombers had devastated German cities and were now hunting the last remnants of the Kriegsmarine with systematic efficiency. Nalo kept his boat deep and quiet, avoiding contact, preserving his vessel and crew. They made it past the northern tip of Scotland and into the Atlantic shipping lanes west of the Faroe Islands. This was where the hunting was traditionally good for U-boats. Merchant convoys passed through these waters carrying supplies to Britain and Russia. But by May 1945, the convoy system was so well defended that attacking was suicidal. Nalo had no intention of attacking anything. He was simply trying to survive, to reach Norway or find some way to surrender honorably rather than be hunted down like an animal. But survival required being invisible, and U-534 had been spotted. On May 2nd, a British aircraft on anti-submarine patrol detected a radar contact, brief, fleeting, possibly a submarine running on the surface. The contact's position was radioed to nearby naval units. HMS Liberator and HMS Rook, two frigates of the Royal Navy's 8th Escort Group, altered course to investigate. They were experienced submarine hunters, veterans of the Battle of the Atlantic, and they knew their business. Through the night of May 2nd and into the early morning of May 3rd, the British ships prosecuted their contact. They used sonar to track the submerged submarine, working in coordination, boxing U-534 into an increasingly smaller area of ocean. Below, Nalo and his crew could hear the sonar pings, could track the surface ship's movements, could calculate with sickening certainty that they were being herded into a trap. Nalo faced an impossible decision. He could try to run deep and silent, hoping to evade, but his batteries were low from days of submerged running. He could surface and fight, but his deck gun was no match for the frigate's armaments. He could surface and surrender, but there was no guarantee the British wouldn't simply sink them anyway. Many U-boats attempting to surrender in the final weeks of the war were attacked before they could signal their intentions. Or he could scuttle the boat, destroying it to prevent capture and giving his crew a chance to survive in life rafts. At 2:47 a.m. on May 3rd, 1945, the British ships began their attack run. They had U-534 pinned on sonar, depth and bearing confirmed. The first pattern of depth charges was released, heavy drums of high explosive set to detonate at 60 meters, the estimated depth of the submarine. The charges tumbled through the dark water and exploded with devastating force. Even 50 meters away, the shockwaves slammed into U-534's hull like hammer blows from an angry god. Inside the submarine, the world became chaos. The lights went out, plunging the interior into darkness broken only by emergency lamps. Men were thrown from their feet. Equipment tore free from mountings. The pressure hull groaned and shrieked as metal stressed beyond its design limits. Water began spraying from a dozen small leaks, high-pressure jets that could cut flesh to the bone. The crew scrambled to control the damage, to stop the leaks, to keep the boat level and functional. But more depth charges were coming. The British ships were experienced, methodical, deadly. They adjusted their pattern based on the results of the first attack, compensating for U-534's attempts to maneuver. The second salvo was closer, more accurate. The explosions were so powerful that men's noses bled from the pressure changes. The submarine's trim tanks were damaged. The electric motors were failing. Battery acid was leaking, mixing with seawater to create chlorine gas that burned lungs and eyes. Nalo made his decision. "Prepare to surface," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare to abandon ship. We scuttle on my command." The crew knew what this meant. They would blow the ballast tanks and surface directly under enemy guns. Those who survived the gunfire would have minutes to get off before U-534 sank. In these waters, in May, the ocean temperature was perhaps 6 degrees Celsius. Without immersion suits, hypothermia would kill anyone in the water within 20 minutes. The life rafts might save some. Might. At 3:11 a.m., U-534 broached the surface like a dying whale, her hull battered, diesel smoke pouring from vents, her deck gun unmanned. Nalo had ordered the scuttling charges armed, explosives placed in the bilges that would flood the boat and send her to the bottom. On the bridge, in the pale pre-dawn light, he could see the British frigates turning toward them, signal lamps flashing, deck guns swiveling into position. The British captains faced their own decision. The submarine was clearly disabled, possibly attempting to surrender. But U-boats had used false surrenders before, coming up peacefully only to attack when the enemy approached. And standing orders were clear. U-boats were to be destroyed. The war might be ending, but it wasn't over. Not officially. Not yet. HMS Liberator opened fire with her 4-inch deck gun. The first shells fell short, sending up columns of water that soaked U-534's deck. The crew was pouring out of hatches now, grabbing life vests, launching the life rafts, jumping into the water to get clear before the submarine went down. Nalo stood on the conning tower, watching his men abandon ship, counting heads, trying to ensure everyone was off before he triggered the scuttling charges. The second British salvo was more accurate. Shells slammed into U-534's pressure hull, punching through the already weakened metal. One shell hit near the conning tower, and Nalo felt the shrapnel tear through his left arm and side. He staggered but didn't fall. Below him, the scuttling charges detonated. The submarine lurched, her stern dipping as water poured in through the open sea valves and the shell holes and the depth charge damage. "Abandon ship," Nalo shouted, though most of the crew was already in the water. He took one last look at his command, the boat he'd lived in for 5 months, the steel coffin that had been home and prison and fighting platform. Then he climbed down from the conning tower and jumped into the Atlantic. The cold was a physical shock, driving the air from his lungs, seizing his muscles. Around him in the water, his crew struggled, calling to each other, swimming toward the life rafts, trying to stay alive. U-534 was going down fast now, her bow rising as the stern sank, water cascading off her deck, air bursting from hatches in great bubbles. For a moment she hung vertically, as if taking one last look at the sky, then she slid beneath the surface and was gone. The British frigates approached cautiously, watching for survivors, ready to fire if this was a trick. But it was no trick. In the water were 52 German sailors, exhausted, wounded, freezing, defeated. The British hauled them aboard, gave them blankets and hot tea, treated their wounds, and made them prisoners. 3 men had died during the depth charge attack. 49 survived, including Herbert Nalo, who would spend the next several months in a prisoner-of-war camp before being repatriated to a Germany that no longer existed in the form he'd known. U-534 settled on the seabed at a depth of 62 meters, intact but flooded, her hull breached in multiple places, her crew compartments filled with water and darkness. And there she lay, forgotten in the chaos of war's end, as the world above moved on. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The U-boat war officially ended. The Battle of the Atlantic was over, the bloodiest, longest continuous military campaign in World War II. 3,000 Allied merchant ships sunk, 72,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen dead, 783 U-boats lost, 30,000 German submariners dead, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military branch in any nation during the war. The survivors tried to rebuild their lives in the ruins of Germany. Herbert Nalo returned to his family in Hamburg, found his city destroyed by Allied bombing, found his country occupied and divided, found himself part of a defeated nation trying to comprehend the magnitude of the crimes committed in its name. He became a civilian, worked in reconstruction, never spoke much about his war service. When people asked, he would say simply that he'd done his duty as he understood it, that he'd tried to bring his men home, that he'd failed 3 of them. The guilt stayed with him. The memories stayed with him. The dreams of being trapped underwater, the air running out, the pressure hull collapsing, those stayed with him until the day he died in 1968, for years before his old command was found again. Because U-534 was not forgotten forever. In 1972, a Danish survey ship conducting underwater mapping of the North Atlantic discovered an anomaly on the seabed, a large, man-made object at a depth of 62 meters. Further investigation with underwater cameras revealed it to be a submarine, remarkably well-preserved despite 27 years on the ocean floor. The cold, low-oxygen conditions at that depth had prevented significant deterioration. The pressure hull was breached in several places, but the structure was largely intact. The discovery sparked immediate interest. Which U-boat was this? What had it been doing in these waters in May 1945? What secrets might it contain? British naval archives were consulted. Reports from HMS Liberator and HMS Rook were reviewed. The position matched. This was U-534, the last U-boat sunk in the Atlantic during World War II, or very nearly so. A salvage operation was planned, but it would be years before it could be executed. Raising a 1,000-ton submarine from 62 meters of water was technically challenging and expensive. It wasn't until 1993 that a Danish salvage company, with funding from private investors and historical societies, finally brought U-534 back to the surface. The raising was a delicate operation. Divers descended to the wreck and attached heavy lifting cables to reinforced points on the hull. A floating crane barge positioned itself over the site. Slowly, carefully, over the course of several days, U-534 was lifted from the seabed. Water poured from her hull as she rose, cascading from hatches and shell holes and torn seams. When she finally broke the surface after 48 years underwater, she was a ghost ship, encrusted with marine growth, her paint gone, her metal corroded, but still recognizably a U-boat, still bearing the scars of her final battle. She was towed to Birkenhead, England, and placed in a specially constructed dock for preservation and study. And then the investigations began. Teams of historians, archaeologists, and naval experts descended on the wreck, documenting everything, photographing every compartment, cataloging every artifact. What they found was a time capsule, a perfectly preserved snapshot of life aboard a U-boat in 1945. Personal effects of the crew were still there, letters from home, photographs of wives and children and sweethearts, diaries, books, playing cards. The galley still contained dishes and utensils. The bunks still had their thin mattresses, rotted but present. The torpedo room still had one torpedo loaded in its tube, never fired. The engine room's machinery was seized with corrosion but intact. In the captain's quarters, they found Nalo's personal log, the ink faded but still legible, documenting the patrol's final days with spare, professional entries that revealed nothing of the fear or desperation he must have felt. But they also found anomalies, things that didn't quite add up. There were provisions aboard sufficient for a much longer patrol than U-534 had undertaken. There were spaces in the cargo holds that appeared to have been emptied in a hurry, scratches and marks suggesting boxes or crates had been removed. And most intriguingly, there were persistent rumors among the salvage crew and investigators of items that were found and quietly removed before official cataloging began. The conspiracy theories that had always surrounded U-534 exploded with new intensity. Was she carrying Nazi gold? Looted art? High-ranking officials attempting to escape to South America? Secret weapons plans or advanced technology the Nazis wanted to keep from Allied hands? The evidence was tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive. No gold was found. No officials. No secret documents. Either the rumors were false, or whatever U-534 had been carrying was removed before she was scuttled, or was taken by early salvage divers before the official raising, or simply disintegrated during the decades underwater. The most credible theory, based on analysis of surviving Kriegsmarine documents and interviews with U-boat veterans, is that U-534 was indeed carrying something, most likely classified documents and possibly some personnel, from Germany to Norway, where Admiral Donitz had briefly established a government after Hitler's death. But in the chaos of the final days, with communication breaking down and Allied forces closing in, the mission became irrelevant. Whatever U-534 carried, it went down with her, and if it had value, that value died with the Third Reich. What is certain is that U-534 provides an invaluable historical record. She is one of very few U-boats preserved in such complete condition. Most that survived the war were scuttled in deep water as part of Operation Deadlight, the Allied plan to dispose of the captured U-boat fleet. Those that were kept for study were eventually scrapped or broken up. U-534 is unique. A complete, intact U-boat from the final days of the war, preserved not in a museum but by the ocean itself, raised not as a trophy but as a historical artifact. She is now on permanent display at the Woodside Ferry Terminal in Birkenhead, cut into sections so visitors can see inside, walk through the compartments, understand the claustrophobic reality of submarine warfare. The exhibit is powerful and disturbing. You can see where the crew slept, where they ate, where they worked and fought and died. You can see the damage from the British depth charges and gunfire. You can see the scuttling charges that Nalo detonated to send his boat to the bottom. And you can see the personal effects, the photographs, the letters, the small human touches that remind you these were not monsters or abstractions, but men, young men mostly, who served a terrible cause, but who also felt fear and love and hope and desperation. The ethical questions raised by U-534 are profound and uncomfortable. Should we preserve artifacts of Nazi Germany? Does displaying a U-boat glorify the regime it served? How do we remember the ordinary soldiers and sailors of the Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine without sanitizing or excusing the evil they were part of? These questions have no easy answers. What U-534 does, perhaps better than any museum exhibit or history book, is force us to confront the human reality of war. The men who served aboard her were products of their time and place, raised in a culture that had been poisoned by fascism and ultranationalism, taught to value duty and obedience above morality. They were not uniquely evil. Put young men from any nation in the same circumstances, with the same propaganda, the same pressures, the same limited choices, and many would make similar decisions. This doesn't excuse what they did or the cause they served, but it does complicate the simple narrative of good versus evil. Herbert Nalo was not a Nazi Party member. He was a career naval officer who had joined the Kriegsmarine in 1932, before Hitler came to power, when Germany's navy was a small, professional force focused on coastal defense. He served because it was his profession, his identity, his life. When his country went to war, he fought. When his government revealed itself as monstrous, he was already too deep, too committed, too trapped by duty and circumstance to extract himself. He did not commit atrocities that we know of. He sank Allied ships. That was his job, but he did not machine gun survivors or commit the kinds of war crimes some U-boat commanders were guilty of. He was, by most accounts, a competent, professional officer who tried to keep his crew alive in impossible circumstances. Does this make him innocent? No. He served the Nazi regime, even if he didn't believe in its ideology. He participated in a war of aggression and genocide, even if he didn't personally pull triggers in concentration camps. He is part of the moral complexity that World War II forces us to confront, the reality that most people who enable great evil are not themselves particularly evil, just ordinary people making ordinary compromises that collectively create extraordinary horror. The survivors of U-534's crew lived out their lives with this burden. Of the 49 who survived the sinking, most returned to Germany, rebuilt their lives, raised families, worked ordinary jobs. Some spoke about their experiences. Most did not. The submarine service brotherhood remained strong. They would meet occasionally, these old men who had shared the steel coffin, and they would remember the comrades who didn't make it home, and they would grapple with the question that haunted all German veterans. What had it all been for? The last survivor of U-534's crew died in 2009, taking with him the final first-hand memories of that last patrol, the final depth charge attack, the cold Atlantic water, the end of the U-boat war. But the boat itself remains a physical memory, a tangible connection to that lost world. When you stand beside her hull, when you see the damage, when you read the names of the crew members stenciled on a memorial plaque, you are confronting history not as abstract narrative, but as physical reality. The ocean gave up U-534 after 30 years of holding her. The rusted metal, the corroded instruments, the rotted personal effects, all of it testimony to time's passage, to the ocean's patience, to history's long memory. She was hidden in the depths through the entire Cold War, while the world above transformed, while Germany divided and reunified, while the generation that fought World War II aged and died and passed their memories to children and grandchildren who would never fully understand. And now she sits on dry land, cut open for examination, her secrets largely revealed or forever lost, depending on what you believe. She is a museum piece, an educational tool, a memorial, a warning. She reminds us that war is not glorious adventure, but grim necessity at best and monstrous crime at worst. She reminds us that the men who fight wars are human beings, complicated and flawed, capable of courage and cruelty, often forced to choose between terrible options, living with the consequences long after the shooting stops. The ocean is full of wrecks like U-534, ships and submarines and aircraft that went down during the war, each one a story, each one a tragedy, most of them unknown and unmarked. They are monuments to the price of the conflict that defined the 20th century, the war that killed perhaps 80 million people, destroyed entire cities, reshaped the political map of the world, and cast a shadow that reaches into our present day. U-534 had the strange fortune to be found, to be raised, to be remembered. Most do not. Most rest in darkness, forgotten, their crews' names unknown, their final moments unrecorded. But they are there, on the ocean floor, in the jungle, in the desert, wherever men fought and died, physical echoes of history, waiting for time and tide to reveal them or claim them forever. As the sun sets over Birkenhead, casting long shadows across U-534's rusted hull, you can almost hear the echoes, the throb of diesel engines, the ping of sonar, the voices of young men speaking German, calling coordinates, reporting damage, trying to survive just one more hour. They failed, most of them. They went down with their boat or died in the cold Atlantic or lived to see their cause defeated and their world destroyed. But their boat survived, and now it tells their story, complicated and tragic and deeply human. A story without heroes or villains, only men trapped by history and circumstance, doing their best or their worst, and in the end, simply being remembered.